My daughter is so spoiled. I've kicked her out of my house twice, and you guys will not believe what she's done.
There is a fire on the mountain, and even the cops are not at rest. I'm a retired civil engineer who worked with the government, and though I have what I could ever need to live the rest of my life in peace is the last thing I'm currently experiencing. I got married pretty early in life, and my wife and I have just had one child. Karen, I think I would hold my job responsible for that because nothing was medically wrong with my wife or me. I was always out there in the field, and this meant that our daughter had to be trained by my wife, Kate. I must praise her at this point because most women would have taken advantage of the situation. I knew that I was barely present in my daughter's life, and so I always compensated by spoiling her with gifts and things which I should not have. My wife began to object of how generous I was to my daughter, but that did not make me discontinue, and if you were in my shoes, you might have done the same, or heck, you might have done worse. Just imagine if you only saw your daughter once a week, every month. All the same, it turned out my wife was right after all. She started giving me complaints about our daughter displaying signs of stubbornness, but I handled the issue with a kid's glove. I spoke to my daughter, but I never really disciplined her or put measures in place to deal with the situation. I got back home one weekend for my daughter's 18th birthday celebration. I had sent money for a party to be thrown for her at the house, and I had to squeeze out time to show up on the day and not a day before. I got to the house and my wife began complaining to me about how our daughter was now moving with the wrong gang. She emphasized that Karen even had a boyfriend, and this was something I did not want at the point because she was in high school her final year. Well, I went ahead to promise to deal with her. I'm going to deal with the situation after the party, even though I downplayed most of the things my wife had said as an over-exaggeration. The party began, and I watched the kind of friends whom my daughter invited to the house. The way that she dressed, disgracing to say the least. And to cap it off, she brought her boyfriend to introduce to her mother and me. It was clear to me that my wife was not exaggerating one bit. Things had degenerated to the point where my daughter could bring a man to me and her mother without having a second thought. I did not react the way I wanted to, but I made sure the party ended early. My daughter's boyfriend wanted to sleep over, but that was a request I was not going to grant even in her wildest dreams. I let my daughter sleep off the excitement that night, but I woke her the very early next morning to address what I had observed. I took my time to advise my child against that kind of life that she was trying to live. I rounded off my talk to her by asking her to cut off from her boyfriend and not think about establishing a relationship with any other guy, as such relationships at that point in her life were only a distraction that could prove costly. Even though my daughter promised to do so, she initially declined, as she said the guy loved her to bits. I had to insist she obeyed me, as love was not enough to build a home, and the guy equally had to work on himself. I went away for 3 weeks, and my wife began trying to contact me through every means possible. I got her message and she demanded that I return home quickly, as there's a problem in the house. So I obtained permission and went home to see my wife weeping uncontrollably. She told me that our daughter was responsible for her tears as she was pregnant. I froze to my bones. The disappointing part was that my daughter was not moved by the situation, which she confirmed to be true. I asked who was responsible for the pregnancy. She said it was her boyfriend. This was the same guy whom I'd asked her to cut off ties with barely a month ago. I got mad and lashed out at my daughter. Everything I had said to her about being distracted by guys was like pouring water on a stone. It had no impact. Rather than apologize for what she did, my daughter reacted by saying she was legally within the age where she could decide for herself. She rudely said her pregnancy was a result of pure love. and that her mother and I were simply overreacting. I don't think that there are words to describe how broken I was. The reason why I was out there on the field was so my daughter could have a comfortable life, and she had repaired her mom by getting pregnant. Well, before I could say anything, she went into her room, picked up a few of her things, and decided to leave. She was going to the boy's place, the baby daddy. I did not attempt to stop her. It was actually what I needed at that point, not wanting to see her. She returned home 4 months later, and I was home at this point, and the pregnancy was already very visible, and she looked underfed and haggard. I suspected that she was either having trouble with her boyfriend who, quote, loved her to pieces, or the reality of love not being enough had hit her, and I was correct. Her boyfriend was absconded after it dawned on him that he could not raise a child at this point in his life. I think he left her a note to not bother looking for him. My daughter pleaded with me to take her in, but I refused, letting her back into the house. Her mother, who had been worried about her daughter's well-being all the months that she had been away, pleaded on her behalf, but I refused. I was determined to make her face the responsibilities that resulted from her actions. After all, if she was of legal age to take decisions, she was equally of legal age to face the consequences. My wife succeeded in changing my mind, and I had to cave in because this was our only child. I took my daughter back into the house, and her mother took care of her and the pregnancy while I returned to work. I visited home a few months after my daughter had given birth to my first grandchild. It was a beautiful girl. I called my daughter afterward and asked her to get a college form so she could go to college since she was done with high school. I thought that her life was not over because she had gotten pregnant a few weeks after graduation. I seriously believed that she could turn out great if she wanted to. Well, she did not want to. She told me that she wanted to use the next year to take care of her child. Her excuse was useless. How could she be talking about taking care of her child when my wife was around and willing to do so? She was not interested in her studies, and that was that. I think 6 months had passed before I returned to the house again. I suggested to my daughter that she gets a job at least, since she's not going to go to college that year. There was no point in her sitting there at the house doing nothing. Karen wanted to come up with an excuse of needing some time to herself as she had recently given birth, but I noted that 6 months was enough, quote, self-healing. I was on leave for about a month, so I did not bother asking her to go job hunting as she could come up with an excuse of how there's no jobs around, so I took it upon myself to get her one. Karen was fired from her first job within the first 5 days, and I got her another one, and she managed to stay for 2 weeks because the owner was a friend of mine. He had to eventually fire her when he saw his business was being put in jeopardy by her. I did not hold a grudge against him. No, not when I knew who my daughter was. I would not even take her for free if I had the company and was in serious need of staff. Both of them complained of the same thing, her unwavering commitment and being lazy. This was how Karen remained at home, doing nothing besides sneaking out for occasional parties. Karen's attitude remained unchanged over the years. My career as a civil engineer had recently come to a close, and I retired with enough money to take care of myself and my household for the rest of my life. I did not throw any retirement party. I know the retirement phase is something that most people in my position would eagerly look forward to, but I was saddened by the fact that my daughter was not capable of taking care of what I had toiled to gather over the years if I passed away. I was now retired, so I had ample time to see to it that my granddaughter did not turn out like her mother. My wife recently made some observations about our daughter Karen and told me about the possibility of Karen being pregnant. The mere thought of Karen getting pregnant for the second time in my house, well, it was scary. We confronted her about it, and she said amidst it was true. She, however, noted that the person responsible for it was willing to get married to her. The prospect of someone getting married to Karen was such a relief to us, honestly, because she would finally be out of our hands. I considered whoever would get married to her to be unfortunate, though, because she could not take care of herself, much less take care of a home. All the same, I viewed whoever must have gotten her pregnant to be irresponsible, so they both deserved each other. I had some questions about the whole marriage thing, though. Karen was already a single mom, and there was nothing wrong with getting married to someone like that. Most people had their reservations, you know? I asked my daughter if her man was aware, and she said that he was. I then proceeded to ask her to bring him to the house, so I could have a sit-down and a chit-chat with my soon-to-be in-law. I did not plan to discourage my daughter from getting married to him if I discovered he was suitable. I just wanted her out of my house because all she had ever met were heartaches. Karen brought her man home, and immediately I saw him. I just knew he was a, quote, never-do-well kind of guy. My wife and I did not react like we were uncomfortable by his presence, but we were. I asked about his background and, what he did for a living. He said that he was a salesman and his family lived in another state. Well, I was curious to know what he had, seen in my daughter to decide on getting married to her despite knowing that she was a single mom. This guy talked about how he had seen certain virtues and homely values in my daughter and knew from the get-go that she was the kind of wife he was looking for. He claimed the fact that she was deceived earlier by a guy does not make her less of a human being. On the surface, it would appear that this guy loved my daughter and all, but I knew he was lying. He could not even sell a lie and yet claim to be a salesman. Where had he seen my daughter display homely values? The only place he could see my daughter was in the club, where she was probably partying, and what was he doing in a club to begin with? Karen, whom I knew had no values or virtues, and anyone who stayed 10 minutes with her would attest to that. Besides, this, quote, sales guy said he knew my daughter was the kind of wife he was looking for, and his first move was to get her pregnant. How tactical. I didn't care, though. I just went on to ask him what the marriage plans were, and he said that they had decided to hold on and talk the marriage off until the child was born. He, however, promised that they would get married within a few weeks of Karen's delivery. The signs were there. This guy was clearly after something. What was the point of waiting till Karen had given birth? It was just a pity that my daughter had remained foolish after all these years of mistakes. I dismissed the young man, and I shared my thoughts with my wife, who was already on the same page with me. She noted that she was going to warn our daughter, but I tried restraining her by asking if she wanted our daughter to grow old at home as a mother of kids without any father. Kate did not listen. She went ahead to tell our daughter what we felt, but Karen did not listen to her either. She would go out and spend some days with her man, and I never for once intruded. Why would I? She was already pregnant, so what else could happen? 9 months passed and Karen gave birth to her second child. It was a boy this time around. I did not want a situation whereby the fellow would start changing his mind, so I resumed the question of marriage, and he claimed that they had started making plans as he promised, and they would be wedded within a few weeks. I still kept my fingers crossed and eagerly hoped the marriage happened early enough so I could be free of my daughter's headaches. 2 months went by, and I was yet to see any signs of marriage. No preparation, nothing. I discovered that the young man had begun keeping away from the home. He stopped coming to see his son. Karen approached me a few days ago to discuss her lover, and the child that they shared. I felt it was about the marriage, and I genuinely made up my mind to cover the cost of the wedding just to see the process done speedily. But that was not what my daughter wanted to talk about. Karen said she wanted her boyfriend to move into the house so he could be closer to the kid. Her request was stupid, just as stupid as both her and her boyfriend. I told her that he could not move into my house as the proper thing to do was to get married to her and take both her and their son to his own house. If he so badly wanted to be close to his son, then he was to do the needful. Besides, he had promised to get married to her just a few weeks after her delivery, so I did not understand what the whole coming to live in my house was all about. Karen went on to make another request, and that was what I should give her, some money and stuff, and this was around $5,000, and it was ridiculous. She was being provided for at home. Her boyfriend was yet to spend a dime on her or her pregnancy ever since she got pregnant. I asked what she needed the money for, and she could not lie, using herself or the baby, so she simply told me the truth. The money was not meant for her. It was for her lover. I still demanded some explanation as to why she needed some money for her boyfriend, who was supposed to be providing for her and their son, and not the other way around. Karen noted that he was having issues with his accommodations and things were not going great at his workplace. My suspicions were confirmed. This guy had no plans of getting married to my daughter, or if he did, it was not going to happen anytime soon, as he lacked the means, and I was no longer willing to assist as the whole thing seemed malicious. I ended the discussion by telling Karen I had no money to give her or to her lover. I had already done enough for both of them by doing my duty, which was covering the cost of the postnatal bills. Karen left the house 4 days ago, and while we were not expecting her anytime soon, she rushed back home crying her eyes out and locked herself in her room. We tried but failed at getting her to open up to us. Kate and I suspected it had something to do with her boyfriend, whose mobile line has not been going through ever since. Kate and I were still wondering what the issue was when Karen rushed out of her room this morning, still crying. We ran after her, but found it difficult to keep up. It's been 3 days now, and we're yet to see any signs of her. Under the usual circumstances, we would not be bothered, but they left the house crying, and that's not normal. Update number 1. Some missing things or people are best left unseen. My wife and I had contacted the cops, and a search was put out for her. My daughter Karen returned home unhurt today after spending some days outside. I was taking a nap when I got distracted by the tears, which I heard coming from the parlor. I got there to find my daughter crying, and my wife trying her best to console her. There was no injuries on her body or marks to suggest that she's been in any sort of danger, so it was somewhat a relief to know she was safe. I tried empathizing with her and asked what the issue was, and she initially snubbed me. I felt she had not heard me, so I asked her again. Karen flared up, and my heart skipped a few beats. She said I should not act like I cared about her when I was her problem. I was trying to make sense of what my daughter was saying, but Kate immediately gestured for me to ignore it. She took her inside, and I impatiently waited for her to come tell me what the heck the drama was about. Kate came out after a few minutes and said Karen had been at her friend's place the past few days. Well, I was glad she wasn't kidnapped or something, but staying at a friend's place for some days without thinking about her children and making us contact the police was something serious, and I needed explanations. So I went ahead and asked Kate to start from the part where our daughter had run out of the house. Kate said Karen had met with her boyfriend days after I had turned down her request to let him move in with me, or give her some money to give to him. She said Karen's boyfriend had broken up with her after she failed to give him the money or get me to let him stay there. So, he did not own a place of his own and had been squatting with his friends. Well, the salesman's story was a hoax. The sad part was that the boyfriend had gone incognito. I took some time to process what my wife was telling me. In actuality, my daughter had known from the onset that her boyfriend had nothing doing, and she had teamed up with him to lie about it. A lie I did not buy. The surge of anger, which I felt was uncontrollable, I rushed to my daughter's room and demanded she left my house immediately with her belongings and never returned. My wife was trying to pacify me, but it wasn't working. Karen was being hesitant in leaving, so I dragged them out of my house while her kids watched. She threatened to make me pay, and it was just talk. It's been 3 days since the event, and my wife Kate has not been herself. This is because I forbid her from speaking with me about the issue. I'm just fed up with my daughter's nonsense, and there's no turning back this time around. Update number 2. So, my wife's attitude ever since I sent our daughter out of the house has made my home somewhat gloomy, and I wanted to speak with her about it. I tried making her understand that for her health, she was supposed to think less, but she said she could not stop thinking about the rift between our only child and me. Well, she would not be thinking for a very long time because, hey, my mind is made up. We were still talking when my daughter waltzed into the house as she owned it. She claimed she had come for 2 reasons, one of which was to get her kids. Hearing my daughter demand to have her kids was so hysterically funny. She did not care about her kids, and she had nothing to use in taking care of them. I knew she had come back because she was broke. I told her she could have her kids when I was sure that they would be fine under her care. Well, she said I had no right to do so, and she was correct in a sense, but I didn't care. She probably saw the bond my wife and I shared with our grandkids, and she wanted to take them away as a means to hurt me. I asked how she intended to cater for the children, and she said that she had it all planned out. It wasn't my business anyways. Oh, well, that's where she was wrong. They were my grandkids, and I would not fold my hands and watch while she ruined their lives, like literally. She then said her other reason for coming was to demand the inheritance. I laughed so darn hard. I looked at my wife, and she was embarrassed at our daughter's flat-out attitude. She had been too sober trying to mediate and even emotionally blackmail me into bringing back Karen, and Karen was unapologetic about what happened. It was the guts that got to me. How could she be demanding the things which I had worked hard to get over the years with such audacity? I thanked her for reminding me that I still had her name in my will, and that was something I was going to correct soon. I made her a promise that she was not going to get a cent of my money or property. I asked her to leave my house if that was all she came to for, and she began creating a scene. Well, we replayed the scene of me dragging her out of the house. She promised to make sure I paid, but I'm already used to her threats by now. One thing I found amusing was that my wife supported my actions this time around. We've not seen or heard from our daughter ever since, and I want things to remain just as they are. Update number 3. I've just emerged victorious from a court case with my daughter. After her last visit to my house, I made good on my promise of taking her off my will. She too kept her promise of trying to make me pay, and this was why she filed a lawsuit against me. Karen accuses me in her lawsuit of illegally taking her kids and keeping them away from her, which, by the way, has been detrimental to her health, especially emotionally. If you think her lawsuit was a useless for her, wait till you hear her demands. Karen was demanding her kids be returned to her, and she wanted her share of the inheritance as compensation. After going through what I have in life, I can confidently say that nothing is as unfortunate as having a useless child. I could not wait for the court day to arrive because I was certain the case would be thrown out almost especially once the judge heard the things that I wanted to say. The day finally arrived, and Karen appeared in court with the hopes of leaving a rich lady. She took the stand, right? Began expanding on the lie which she had been peddling in her lawsuit. She labeled me a failure in the courtroom and said I was heartless for separating a mother from her children. She even claimed my grandkids had been ill-treated ever since I left the house, and went ahead to plead with the court to grant her justice by giving her what she said was her rightful inheritance. I was angry at my daughter, but at the same time I was glad that she had said the things that she said, as it would allow me to prove her a liar. I started from the teenage years of my daughter. how she had always done her things despite warnings and pleas. I went on to explain that I had been catering for my grandkids ever since they were born, and my daughter, who was accusing me of illegally keeping them away, she has never made a reasonable contribution towards her well-being. I did not stop there. I made sure that I was detailed about her escapades in the past to properly establish to the judge that my daughter was not going to be a suitable parental guide to my grandkids. My defense ended with me presenting my grandkids that had no signs of mistreatment and asked the judge to ask my daughter, who was fighting for custody, what job she did. Well, the judge was surprised on learning that Karen had no job and was barely struggling to live ever since I kicked her out of the house. He passed the verdict in my favor. He told Karen she was not in a stable financial situation and could not guarantee the well-being of the kids. He equally noted that she was only entitled to my wealth if her name was on my will, and since that was not the case, she was not going to get a thing. I was granted custody of our kids while Karen was asked to pay child support to me. She would need to get a job for this. Update number 4. Ever since the verdict was passed and Karen was told she would be paying child support bi-weekly, I eagerly looked forward to how she would meet up because I know her laziness to be legendary. Well, Karen was forced to work double shifts as a waiter and a dishwasher at a nearby restaurant. Kate and I had a good time laughing hard when we got the news because this was someone who we could count the number of times that she's done the dishes. We decided to go out for lunch at the place where our daughter works so we could see for ourselves. If she had disciplined herself enough to go to college, she would have gotten herself a high-paying job. We got there and Karen was attending to some people. She got distracted when she saw us and let the cup and the tray which she carried slide. The manager complained about her and threatened to fire her if she defaulted one more time. It was clear from the way he spoke that it was not the first time he was complaining about her. Kate and I took our leave shortly, and Karen showed up at her home the very next day. I had the kids taken to their rooms, and this was the second time I was denying Karen access to her kids, and this time around, I had the full backing of the law. Before I could ask Karen what she was doing at my home, she went on her knees, started apologizing and begging, right there to her mother and me. She said she could not keep up with the work and the child support that she was supposed to pay me. She asked that I brought her back into the home. I fought to hide the laughter that was bubbling on my inside. This was the first time my daughter was apologizing to Kate and me in all these years. Well, I could not accept her apology for various reasons. She was only doing so because she was uncomfortable with the situation. Forgiveness, according to her, meant she would be included in my will and I would come back to living her life of laziness. I was not willing to make that mistake twice. Karen, her apology, it was useless, and I was not going to change my mind in regards to the situation of things, so I asked her to never come back to my house, except during the times when she was to meet with her kids. I was, to be the one who would initiate a venue. I told her I expected her first child support payment, which by the way is due in just a few days, and failing to meet up with court, it landed her some months in jail. Something I would not hesitate to report.
Alright, so the comment section on this one had a lot of mixed emotions, a lot of mixed feelings. They were saying how OP should have been a lot more kind to his daughter. He should have welcomed her back, tried to help her get her feet straight, and just helped her with her life. But there were a bunch of comments that were not agreeing to that. They were saying he's given her countless chances, countless times, and she keeps messing up. So I want to hear from you guys which side of it you're on. Drop your comments downstairs. My name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories every day. I hope to see you tomorrow, and remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya!